there we go. Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Meteorology Lab. We've had our share of tropical weather out here, and here you can see a weak thunderstorm rolling into the area from the southeast. And that's all stratus and cumulonimbus layers up there. And just off to the right, rain showers. And out in the Atlantic, we've got a very active weather pattern. This just sprung up in the past couple weeks here. Remember back in August we were talking about how there was nothing going on, and suddenly we are just inundated here. Of course, Florence, we all know about that one. Category 3, 105 knot winds, which is 120 miles an hour, pressure 949, and that's come down a little bit. It's getting into that area we talked about last night with weaker ocean heat content, and I can show you a little bit of that right there. Originally, the storm had been going through this area. That's kind of a lobe of higher OHCs, and then there was this area that we were seeing yesterday that was kind of a little bit dampened there. But as we get into the Gulf Stream waters, which are in this area right here, we should see a bit of intensification, probably peaking sometime tomorrow as it approaches North Carolina. And then once it gets up here on the continental shelf, get in that shallower water, initially there will be some very warm weather, very warm sea surface temperatures in that. But there's only so much energy in that, and of course we've also got the slowing down, which is very important. As you slow a system down, you need more OHC to maintain the circulation, and that's going to work to weaken it just a bit, and we'll look at that a little bit later here. But let's go into the current situation with the storms. There's Florence coming into North Carolina, and it did take that jog southward that we talked about. Remember, the 18Z GFS was showing kind of a track like that, and then the European model was kind of falling in line with that also, and we've seen that long-awaited consistency over the past 4 model runs with a track somewhere in this band right here. So we're looking at South Carolina and the far southeastern tip of North Carolina. Now, the overall trend with the storm has been a westward shift in the track over time, so there's still the possibility South Carolina is not really out of the woods, especially down towards the Charleston area, so you'll want to kind of keep tabs on that tomorrow to see if there's been any changes. But for the time being, it seems like the models have kind of fallen into a new groove there, and like I said, that's looking at anywhere from Myrtle Beach up to Wilmington. Now, we forgot to cover the other storms yesterday. We got so busy with these other ones. Isaac is still down there approaching the Leeward Islands, but that is weakened. Still, or just a tropical storm now. Winds are 60 miles an hour in that, but it is moving very steadily to the west, and that should take it in the Caribbean. And we should be looking good for the next several days, but once it gets out of into this area, we're going to have to take another look at sea surface temperature, OHC, shear, and all those other factors there to see if there's any threat in the Gulf of Mexico or even in the far western part of the Atlantic there near Florida. Helene, of course, we've seen that on the maps, and that's just recurving up towards the Azores there. Looks like the remnants will be heading towards the British Isles there. And we've seen the appearance of subtropical storm Joyce. That's moving out of the picture, so no problem with that. And that leaves us with Olivia. We forgot to cover that yesterday. I don't think we have too many viewers there in Hawaii, but that's already passed over the islands there. Tropical storm. It's only 45 mile an hour sustained winds in that, 10,005 millibars, which is pretty high. So this is more kind of what we see with Kona lows at this point. But yeah, it has moved over the islands, a lot of precipitable water in that. All right, let's look at Florence, and I've got the this very granular enhancement curve here where you can really see the cold tops there. That's what's sometimes referred to as a hot tower. It's a very high cumulonimbus cloud with a lot of cold and high vertical extent there, and there's some more right there in that east spiral band there. And we can see the eyes, looks like it's been covered a little bit by cirrus, but let's roll that into motion, and we can see it's moving pretty steadily there to the west-northwest, heading for the Carolinas. So, yeah, there's the eye there, filling in just a tiny bit, but that should reappear here probably the next couple of hours. So, yeah, it's on its way in there. All right, anything else to cover? Yeah, the OHC, let's look at that product. This is kind of what governs the strength of the storm. Right now, it's going through that depressed area right there. In fact, let me get the motion on, or the coordinates on that real quick so we can lock it in there. 73.2 by 31.5. So that's going to be, yeah, it's going to be right in there. So it is in that depressed area where we've got OHCs around 50, and that's not really quite enough to support a major hurricane, but it is going to be back up into these 70s and 80s as it approaches the Gulf Stream there. So that's where we're going to see the intensification there, where you see those aquas and yellows. And then after that, we'll just have to see what the coastal waters are looking like at that point. Anyway, yeah, we can take a look at Isaac, which is kind of moving through this area. It looks like it's skirting some of those higher OHCs to the north, but yeah, the values are way up there, 100 to 150. So I think what it's probably going to come down to is what the shear looks like, and I haven't really looked at that so far, but that might be something to do over the next few days to see what's going on in the Western Caribbean there. Okay, so yeah, sea surface temperatures, they are running above normal. This is a warm anomaly showing the very warm Gulf Stream waters. And this is about as high as it typically gets during the year. So conditions are definitely primed here for this system. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about the forecast aspects in a minute. Let me jot down a couple notes here so I don't forget anything. Okay. Pretty a lot to keep track of. All right. So what we're going to go ahead and do is just go ahead and do the more conventional tour around the country, and then we'll look at the forecast track of Florence, and that'll give people a chance to pop in here later, because typically our viewer numbers, they tend to increase during the webcast. Pretty quiet across the U.S. there, not much going on. High pressure kind of settling in. Across the southwestern U.S., a few storms in that area, and we'll check out the satellite for that one. Upper level patterns, they're looking like this here. Starting to see the development of a deep upper level low in the Pacific Northwest, and we also see the Hudson Bay vortex way up there to the top of the chart. That thing is really active, and as I've mentioned, we typically don't see it that deep. That's it right there, and that's bringing in the very strong northerly flow. So temperatures are going to be below normal in much of western Canada and the northwest, and some of that could spread even further south into the high plains and parts of the Rockies there. We'll take a quick look at the thickness. This is kind of like the master solution of what's happening, and what we see here is thickness gradient right in this area here. So that's outlining a Pacific front coming into the western states. Leading edge of the air mass looks something like that. That's cold air coming into Nevada and California there. And up in the Dakotas, looks like a little bit of a warm front affecting that area, helping to get some thunderstorms going. Got the combination of the overrunning north of the warm front and probably a little bit of moisture in the low levels pooling near that warm front. And up to the north, we've got the reinforcing shot of cold air coming into central Saskatchewan and into Alberta, and we should see that coming into the northern states in the next day or so. And that's all being driven by that Hudson Bay vortex driving cold air southward. And of course, off the Atlantic coast, there it is, Florence. And of course, we can't forget the high pressure areas, because that represents the air masses we're dealing with. And this is kind of a big combination of Bermuda high and old polar air. And that's covering much of the eastern U.S. like that right there. And we're seeing that ridge developing right there in the Appalachian region, and that extends into the upper levels. And as that system approaches that ridge, it's going to get into weaker steering flow aloft, and that'll help slow down the system, and not only slow it down, but that will give a little bit more of an erratic forecast in the forecast models. So let me see if I can bring up those layered plots, and usually I go to University of Wisconsin for that. They've got a good tropics page. So if you put that in Google, you'll get tropic.ssec.wic.edu. And what you do is you just click on that and go into these regional products, and there's a North Atlantic right there. And we click on the layer mean wind analysis. And this is what we use for steering the systems. Now, typically the dynamic models, especially like the GFS, the UK Met, and European model, those are going to be probably better than what you could determine just winging this on your own. But this will kind of give you a reality check and kind of give a more qualitative picture of what's happening. And let's see, we're going to click on let's do the 500 through 850 millibar layer. Now they got these layers up here. Now the shallowest layer that's on here is going to be 700 through 850. That's going to be about 5 to 10,000. And you'll tend to use that with the weaker tropical cyclones. And as they get up to Category 3, Category 4, you're going to use deeper layers. 500 850 and even 400 to 850. So we'll use 400 to 850 for this system. And this is showing, of course, the Bermuda high right there. We try to ignore the small scale detail right around the hurricane, and what we see here is the ridge extending across the Carolinas there, and that's what's slowing it down there. 500 through 850 also showing the weaker flow out across the eastern U.S. there. And let's see, that's pretty much it as far as that goes. So feel free to use that and see how these tropical systems move with these layer winds. Okay. So anyway, yeah, there's Isaac, and this is a good example. You can see the very steady east to west flow there in the Caribbean. That's part of the trade wind belt there, and that should carry it into the Caribbean, and after that we'll just have to see. You can see we pick up a little bit more of a southerly component there in the Gulf of Mexico, so it's possible the storm could get embedded in that and move up towards the western Gulf area. So we'll see what's going to happen with that in several days. Right now we just don't really know. Okay, let me get my cursor back here and we'll press on. Okay, now the satellite loops, I didn't have a chance to get those going, so we're just going to kind of run through these really shortly. But the animation of what happened today, you can see all the extensive cumulus across the central U.S. there. Down in East Texas, we've had a few thunderstorms develop in there, and you can see a little bit of a disturbance there along the Gulf Coast. That's been kind of in the area over the past couple of days. Up in the northwestern U.S., you can see a little bit of that baroclinic signature there. This tends to show up a little bit better in the infrared imagery, but that's pretty much a baroclinic leaf right there. So we know that somewhere in here, possibly a frontal system embedded in that. And then, of course, out on the east coast, there it is, Florence, heading towards the coast there. And we'll just run a quick loop of that, and not really much to say about this. Starting to turn the winds a little bit around to the north in the Carolinas, so it's a little bit drier there, not seeing quite as much convection in that area. And let's continue on and just look real quickly at the surface chart. Okay, this is the surface chart at this time with the dew points in green. So we can see that most of the intense moisture is down along the Atlantic coast and Gulf Coast, but there's a little lobe extending into the Central Plains. That's due to the southerly flow that's coming up from the Gulf, advecting that moisture northward. And up to the north, indeed, we can see that warm front up in that area. Okay, so I think that's about it as far as the analysis products. So we can go ahead and take a look at the hurricane. I think before we do that, we'll just do the short-term forecast real quick. Not much to say about that. Here in Texas, southeast component, disturbance along the coast there. You can see the cyclonic curvature in the isobars there. That's indicating maybe a weak little easterly wave or a little bit of a tropical disturbance down in that area. So that'll keep the rain chances up in the Victoria, San Antonio, and Houston area. And that'll pretty much be cut off by this ridge extending down from Arkansas. This is kind of like an extension of high pressure up there in that region. And kind of like what we saw with Florence, ridges like that tend to form kind of a barrier. And that kind of demarcates the western edge of the precip. So we're not going to be seeing much in the Dallas area overnight. Then we'll look at the large scale picture there. This is 500 millibars. This is up at about 3 miles in the atmosphere. And you can see a bit of that blocking pattern right there. It's kind of an omega block with that very strong ridge extending up into the Aleutian Islands. And that's keeping the pattern kind of in place. Hasn't moved much, just a lot of troughing along the west coast and ridging on the west coast or east coast. There's the subtropical high right there, and riding along the south part of that in that easterly flow is Florence. So over the next week, let's see what happens. You can see Florence there trying to punch into that ridge right there. And that ridge is not an actual physical barrier. That's just kind of a region where the flow is very light. So that means weaker steering flow and a little bit more erratic movement of the storm. So there it is approaching the coast. Now typically when we see these troughs approaching, that tends to sort of lift the storm out and pick it up. But the problem is that these westerly winds are just too far to the northwest there. They're probably about a good 700 or 800 miles away there. So that's not quite enough to really help with the current situation. So there it is, the storm kind of slowing down in the Carolinas over the weekend, possibly moving down into Georgia. And then finally, we see it close enough to the westerlies to start moving that north. And that's going to be probably about Monday, Tuesday, somewhere in that range. A couple of short waves moving through the flow. There's one right there. So it's probably a frontal system moving through the Montana region on Monday. And you can see that lifts up into Canada. There goes the remains of Florence, somewhere in the Appalachians, and a very strong trough coming out of the Arctic region. So it looks like we're looking at more cold air coming down. So that's a lot of energy coming down from the Arctic regions and kind of syncing up with this deep wave over the west coast there. So I think we're going to be looking at probably some more cold weather here over the next week or so. And yeah, there it goes. Strong northwesterly component. So that'll drive some more cold air into the northern U.S. initially for late next week. And let's see, the very end. Wow, yeah, the pattern amplifies quite a bit. Wow, look at that. So yeah, things will probably be getting more interesting once again towards the third or fourth week of September here. See a little cutoff low developing, or that's probably the remnants of a hurricane, I think. Yeah, it's an old hurricane remnant, so anyway, we can ignore that. Anyway, yeah, one big trough comes into the Great Lakes area around the 24th, 25th, so it looks like a good blast of cold air coming in that region, and possibly into the Central Plains there. And that gets pretty much to the end of the run. So yeah, things will be certainly active this month. September's not always like that. Okay, that brings us to the track of the storm. And once again, I've got the European products, and let's start out with the GFS. And this is thanks to Pivotal Weather. This is the 18Z GFS, and we'll take a look at the forecast. This is probably about as accurate as a track we can get looking at the dynamic models. The as I mentioned, the GFS, European, UK Met, and all that. So it's kind of hard to beat those models. So let me get this reset here. So coming into view is not only Florence, but you can see the pressure there, 954 millibars. And as I've mentioned yesterday, the trend on that pressure is more important than the actual value. I wouldn't like take that and start trying to look up the Saffir-Simpson category and all that. I would, kind of focus on the trends there. So we start out 957 there for, it's going to be about 3 hours from now. And you can see it's starting to intensify a little bit. Just a little bit, down to 953 for 3 a.m. By daybreak, it's coming to within maybe 200-300 miles of the coast there. And then we see gradual intensification there, down to 948, 946. So it's trending downwards through the morning and probably perhaps reaching its peak sometime during the day tomorrow as it approaches I guess it'd be around just south of Morehead City. Wilmington is in that area right there. Morehead City is there. So it kind of looks like maybe the GFS has kind of gone a little bit further north than it did yesterday. Yesterday it was doing something like that right there. Okay, so that's kind of significant there, a slight northward shift in the track. So what we would do is look at tonight's model run and see if that is reflected. We don't want to use just one model run to look at a forecast there. However, in the longer term, going into Friday and Saturday, it does go with that southward shift, very slight, taking the eye into the Wilmington area, and then it does jog that down into South Carolina a little bit later in the life cycle than it did yesterday. So if that pans out, some of the worst of the flooding will be basically from Cape Fear down to, let me get my geography right here. In fact, let me just pull it up here. Cape Fear to Cape Lookout, yeah, there's that sound there. It starts with O, and I forgot that already, but it's basically that little indentation right there, and that's going to be where most of the storm surge is, especially in that area if we go with that GFS track. NHC is looking for storm surge of pretty much anywhere from 6 to 13 feet. They're using Cape Fear to kind of demarcate that, 6 to 9 south of that and 9 to 13 north of that. And that's kind of important because what I did, I don't know if you saw this document, but what I did is I looked at the elevations of the barrier islands, the coast, to kind of see what was going on there. And basically around the Morehead City area going south down the barrier islands, the average, excuse me, the average elevation on those barrier islands, and I put a B for that here, where there's houses is basically about 5 to 12 feet. And the highest elevation on the barrier island, in this case 12 to 17 feet, that's pretty close to the top of the storm surge. So, Yeah, this is going to be definitely significant. Going down further south, the actual city of Wilmington, that's going to be inland a bit, and I put that I there. That ranges up from 10 to 35 feet, plus it's inland a little bit, so I don't think you have to worry too much about flooding unless you're in a low elevation there, and the terrain maxes out about 65 feet. And then going further down the coast, down towards South Carolina, you all can look at that right there. Crossing from North Carolina into South Carolina, we're looking at anywhere from 5 to 15 feet on most of the barrier islands. Some of them are only about 8 feet, which is below the top of the storm surge. And so if that does go south, that's going to be pretty significant. Places like Holden Beach, Ocean Island Beach, and Carolina Beach, those are especially vulnerable there. Then once you get into the Myrtle Beach area, that place is a little bit more built up. There's more solid structures there for they've got those big hotels there, and the elevations are a little bit higher there. 25 to 30 feet is common in some of the built-up areas. Well, actually, this is coastal here, and then South Carolina, that's a little bit low, or Charleston, that's a little bit lower in elevation, but that's pretty far south of the track there. So anyway, that's kind of the summary there. So storm surge is definitely going to be an issue with a storm. All right. So the European model, let's look at that there. And thanks to F5 Data for providing us with this information. Starting out, let's see. This is the European ECMWF model. It is considered pretty accurate, but for some reason, the past couple of weeks, it really has not been doing quite as well as the GFS. So I'm not too sure whether to how much weight to put in this. Anyway, there it is heading up towards the North Carolina coast. Very, very similar track to the GFS. It's almost like dead on with the GFS. So I think pretty much anywhere from Wilmington to Morehead City is certainly under the gun. Things do get a little bit more up in the air once it starts encountering that weaker steering flow. That's going to be on Thursday night into Friday once it starts slowing down. Now, the storm surge is definitely going to be piling up in this area here to the right of the track. So right now, that's basically from northeast of Morehead City up to, northeast of Wilmington up to Morehead City. But if this track shifts, that's going to take the storm surge further down the coast. So we'll just have to see about that. Also, the tides. The tides can be a factor. Some places have tides of up to about 4 feet. And the high tide is going to run about 10 to 11 in the morning, 10 to 11 in the evening, and low tide is going to be in the late afternoon and late night, like 4 to 5 a.m. So probably most of the problems are going to be probably Thursday night and about midday, well, sometime during the morning Friday after dawn. Okay, so we're looking at midnight here, Thursday going into Friday, and the European model brings it pretty much right along the coast and starts migrating it down towards Myrtle Beach. And it's very slow. What you see right here, this is midnight, Friday going into Saturday. So that means torrential rainfall amounts, especially in this area, especially around Wilmington and the surrounding areas. We may see anywhere from 15 to 25 inches in some of those places. So Saturday is a little bit more uncertain. Here's Saturday morning, and it looks like it works down the coast and actually moves towards the Charleston area. So that's Saturday going into Sunday there. And then looks like it finally moves inland, perhaps on late Sunday into Monday. You can see that we've had about 2 to 3 days of torrential rainfall in this area right here. So that's where some of the severe flood risks are going to be most likely. In fact, we can plot up the precip. Let's look at the total run precip and bring that up. That's one of the features they have on this site here. So this is basically totaling up all the precip. over the entire run. So what we're looking at here with the European solution, 12 inches there at Columbia, and then you go down to the coast and looks like anywhere from maybe 15 up to about 25 inches. So yeah, it's pretty much along that axis where the heavier amounts are going to be. And then as we go into next week, depending on where the track of the remnants go, I think we're going to see some torrential rains and probably a lot of flooding in the Blue Ridge Mountains and parts of the Appalachians there. So that's going to be very likely problematic all the way from there down towards probably northeast Georgia. Okay, let me check in on chat, and before I do that, let me set you up with a... I know you probably want to see something interesting while I'm reading chat, so let me bring that up. I'll bring the storm track back up, looking at the European model once again. And we'll freeze frame that on Friday at midday. So there it is right there. Storm just almost crossing into South Carolina there. Okay, so let me see what's going on in chat there. Got Carl Berghoff reminding everybody to click that like button. Shirley Keast is here, and Fred Reamer up there in North Dakota seeing some storms there. David Lumbert in Little Rock, 76 over 70. Got Funwood Tech here. Erica Baker in Southeast Kansas, 80s and partly sunny. 63 where Fred Reamer is up in North Dakota. Got Ryan Toomey is joining us. Ryan is our tropical expert. And he says it's an Atlantic chess game of storms. NHC and NOAA have sea surface temperatures up on the links page. And Category 4 by tomorrow evening, and I would certainly agree with that. I'm really not expecting Category 5 on this storm, but what I would expect is probably Category 4 as it approaches the coast, and then as it gets right up to the coast, probably be looking at Category 2 to 3. So there will be, of course, the rain threat, the wind, storm surge, and, of course, the risk of tornadoes, especially we tend to see that on the the right front quadrant. Let me run this back and I'll show you the area we're talking about. So the storm located right there, and typically we would see that tornado risk kind of in that area right there. So those would be brief tornadoes, kind of transient, mostly focused on the spiral bands, but that could be a hazard, and typically we get those due to the frictional interactions with the land. You get that very strong shear, and it kind of rolls up, kind of like rolling pencils along a desk. If you roll your hand one way and your other hand the other way with a pencil in between, you're going to get that rolling motion. And as that gets lifted up into the cloud, you get that turning. And that's kind of what happens during these hurricanes, except on a very small scale. So they tend to be smaller tornadoes. They're very brief, short-lived, but we can definitely pick them up with the WSR-88D radar. Combination of velocity and spectrum width tends to pull those out. So if we monitor this during landfall tomorrow or tomorrow night, we'll check in on that and try to keep up on the risk there. Okay, let's see. Game Freak is here, and Acastrophe. Shirley Keast mentioning 51 viewers tonight. Yeah, it has been busy. Gina M. asking about wind in Charlotte. It should be a lot weaker inland. Typically, these systems lose their circulation very, very quickly as they move inland. I wouldn't expect the hurricane force winds to go further than maybe 50 or 100 miles inland, maybe 150 tops. I think Charlotte is pretty far out of the picture, but I would certainly expect maybe 30 to 40 mile an hour gusts. And especially with that rain coming down, the soil gets kind of loose, and that can down quite a few trees, and that can be responsible for a lot of power outages there. So I would certainly prepare for the possibility of power outages, even inland, far inland into North Carolina. All right. Yeah, Greenville is going to be underwater probably. That from Ecostrophe, talking about the Tar River. How warm are the waters closer to the coast? I have not actually checked up on that. I'll take a look at that tomorrow as this system gets closer. Whack-a-mole tornadoes, yeah, pretty much there. Gulf Stream will play a major factor tomorrow afternoon during the approach to the coastline. Yeah, those Gulf Stream waters will be in the deeper ocean, and then tomorrow evening we'll see it coming up on the continental shelf, and when we do the webcast tomorrow, we'll kind of check out on some of that data there. And let's see, did I get everybody here? Okay. Yeah, it's pretty much everything there. A couple things I wanted to add about just a little bit about hurricane safety. Hang on, I lost my windows here. A few tips here. If you're close to the coast there, anywhere within 100 to 150 miles, I would take some of these preparations there. Basic food, can and bottle openers, camp stove. Be careful with those indoors, of course. Garbage bags are helpful there. Flashlight, batteries, and radio. Of course, water is important. And you can use any available containers, soda bottles, stuff like that to fill up. And I'll have some more tips on that. Of course, your medications, prescription, first aid kit, important documents, and of course, gasoline for your vehicles. And if you're expecting to be hard hit by that hurricane there, I would fill up the bathtub. And the Red Cross does advise that, actually they don't advise that water from the bathtub be consumed, but if worse comes to worse, you have to do what you have to do. But however, bathtub water can be used for flushing the toilet and cleaning, doing laundry, because it is often not the hurricane itself that is an ordeal. It's what happens afterwards, going for days and days without power, without access to 911 and basic services. That can really wear you down quickly. Yeah, you can throw stuff in the dishwasher. Just don't turn it on, of course. Dishwasher it's almost like a small safe there, so you can put stuff in there. Natural gas, yeah, shut that off if things are going down. You can use your water heater, and of course there's the tips there about consuming water. You can boil questionable water for 10 minutes or use 8 drops per gallon of household bleach, and be sure you let it stand, because that'll let the chlorine get out of that water and it'll evaporate out and make it safe there. If your water is really questionable, I would probably use the technique used by Air Force pilots. You take small sips, start small, and if you don't have any adverse reactions, then gradually increase your use of the water. And of course, pay attention to your pets. You don't want to leave them behind unless it's an absolute emergency. And if you have to, I wouldn't leave them in a crate. I would leave them in a room where they can get out if they have to, and hopefully there's no windows in those rooms. But please take your pets if you have to. And if you're on the road there, be aware most hotels will be booked up already. I would advise not using third-party travel agencies, because typically they accept your bookings even if the hotel is full. So you should always call the hotel directly. Hotels near the coast may also close and cancel your reservation. So having a hotel stay around Wilmington, especially at a small hotel, is no guarantee that you won't get kicked out. Larger hotels, generally, they do stay open, though. In fact, a lot of storm chasers, they are known to hang out in the parking garages at big city Hiltons to watch the storms. Of course, I don't advise you do that. Yeah, take every opportunity to fuel up. Keep in mind you can use back roads for getting around traffic jams. A lot of people are on those freeways, those interstates, and they don't think to get off, and often that can work to your advantage. Just be careful. Make sure you don't forget your phone chargers. Get cash, because a lot of credit card machines will go down. And you can use your airplane mode on your cell phone to conserve battery power. So anyway, that's all I have as far as that goes. Okay, so I think that's all I have for tonight. We're going to probably do a special tomorrow. I think we may just start at 7. It really depends on the timing of the storm, and as the hurricane gets within like maybe 75, 50 miles of the coast, maybe 100 miles, we'll do some live coverage and go over the radar and point out danger areas, look at the storm surge, the intensity trends on the storm, and we'll just monitor it from there. So anyway, it's as we mentioned, it's kind of a ways off right now, but tomorrow we probably will be looking at a bit of a different picture. Okay, well, thanks everybody. Hope you enjoyed the webcast, and like I said, we'll be back tomorrow, likely at 7 p.m. unless the system accelerates. So until then, stay safe, follow those hurricane precautions, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.